Hey everyone, Tactics here, covering the 6th and final tank spec in Dragonflight, the Brewmaster Monk. Just like my previous videos in this series, I'll be taking a look at what's going on with Brew moving into next expansion from ability additions, their new tier set, the talent tree revamp, and even a couple of builds that'll work for both Mythic Plus and rating. If you're interested in seeing those other tank spec videos, I'll leave a link down in the description below for you guys, and do make sure you subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this content, because I'll be posting tons of tank related content all throughout Dragonflight that you will not want to miss. With all that said, let's talk a little bit about what Brewmaster is actually gaining going into Dragonflight, because it is a lot. Some might even say it makes the spec a bit bloated, but I will leave that up for you to decide. From gaining abilities that they previously didn't have access to, like Rising Sun Kick and Diffuse Magic, to being able to select multiple talents that previously used to compete with one another, like Rushing Jade Wind and Exploding Keg, and even being able to select 2 different Covenant abilities simultaneously with the Necrolord Bone Dust Brew and the Kyrian Weapons of Order. Brewmasters are just gaining a ton of buttons going into Dragonflight. And while having more choice and tools is always a good thing, especially for tanks, it can definitely also be very overwhelming. And with so many buttons just available to you at all times, knowing when and where to use each and the order of course of layering those cooldowns can be quite tricky. Personally, I think Brewmaster is probably the most difficult tank to master currently going into Dragonflight, but for those that do, they'll be able to have an extremely powerful and reliable tank with their fantastic sustained damage output and intake. On that note, currently Brewmasters are absolutely pumping when it comes to AoE damage, though a not insignificant portion of that damage currently is from a pretty overtuned passive talent that I assume is going to be tuned down before launch, but again, don't take my word for that, anything could happen. When it comes to their durability, I think this is probably one of their weaker points, which is kind of weird to say when I just said they have so many tools available to them, but kind of compared to other tank specs, especially ones like Protection Warrior, Blood Decay, and Vengeance Demon Hunter, they are struggling a little bit, especially when it comes to specifically sustained magic damage, as it doesn't get fully staggered. This does mean that layering your many defensive CDs will be extremely important to survive in high-end content, which I think is going to lead to a pretty significant skill gap between good and bad Brewmasters, particularly in Mythic Plus. Overall, if you like being able to constantly pump out damage without relying on long cooldowns, and you like having a ton of buttons available at your disposal for whatever situations may arise, Brewmaster is a great choice. From there, let's take a quick look at the tier bonuses Brewmaster is gaining in the first tier of Dragonflight. So their 2-piece bonus is hitting an enemy with Tiger Palm or Spinning Crane Kick grants Brewmaster's Rhythm, increasing damage dealt and reducing damage taken by 1% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. And their 4-piece is for each stack of this Brewmaster's Rhythm, Purifying Brew clears 3% more of your damage delayed with Stagger. So that's a 12% increase up to 62% there at 4 stacks. And that 4 stack from the 2-piece is pretty much just maintained in both AoE and single target, since it's on both Spinning Crane Kick and Tiger Palm, just by doing your rotation normally. So you really won't need to think about it. It's just a nice little passive boost. And that 4-piece is also just a nice passive boost to both your purifying, but also your self-healing as well through a talent, which again I'll talk about later on when we actually get to the Brewmaster specific talents. But it's actually quite a nice passive boost here for Brewmasters. It's simple but effective, which is a pattern among all the tank tier sets we've seen so far, and I think actually something they've done quite well this expansion, at least for tanks, is to balance those tier sets to be relatively close, both power-wise and overall impact and value-wise, right? So all the tanks are relatively close. Brewmaster is no exception, so it's a very welcome change overall in terms of balancing, at least when it comes to the tier bonuses. That brings us to the talent tree, and of course, just like the other videos, we'll start with the Monk class specific tree. So right off the bat here, we can grab Rising Sun Kick. This is a nice boost of single target damage, something you'll want to press consistently on CD in single target, and that leads right into a 3% DR. Now for Mythic Plus specifically now, you're going to have to make a choice here, and basically it's like, do you need a Dispel in this dungeon? If yes, you'll take Detox and likely Disable. If you do not need a Dispel in this dungeon, coming from the Brewmaster specifically, I should say, then going down this way into Paralysis and Improved Paralysis gives you that access to a stop single target stop on a lower CD, and it will let you access the same nodes you wanted to before. So the goal of this pathing choices is to access both Ferocity of Zwen and Fortifying Brew. So you have to do one of these two things in order to conserve these 2 points, because otherwise, if you're like, hey, I kind of want to do Paralysis and Detox, that's great. You spent your 2 points here, but now you don't have access to Fortifying Brew, so you'd have to spend a third point to get there, if that makes sense. So let's assume for now you don't need Detox, so we're going to go Paralysis, improve Paralysis, get your 2 points and increased damage dealt, and now you have a couple points remaining here. So what you can go down this way and start getting some of the healing increases here. So Soothing Mist is just a button you kind of take but don't really ever use. And you can move down here and get a boost to Expel Harm's healing, as well as Critical Strike chance. This unlocks your next row. It is Mythic Plus, so we want that kick. And like I mentioned, you'll want Fortifying Brew, and you'll likely want the boost to Fortifying Brew here. There's 25% armor and dodge, which is nice. Below that, you also have another boost to Expel Harm. This did recently get nerfed. It used to be 200% of the healing, or based on your missing health. We'll see if it's still the go-to for Brewmasters. It's pretty solid, though, and it is one of the main reasons why Expel Harm gets a pretty significant boost via a bunch of talents. And so my guess is you'll still take it, but it might end up moving. Now let's get some extra damage here. 2 points here, giving you a boost to that Rising Sun Kick damage up here in single target, as well as Spinning Crane Kick in AoE. You still have 6 points to spend here. Let's start moving down the middle here. You get Transcendence. You don't really use Transcendence too much in Mythic Plus as a Brewmaster specifically. There's, of course, uses for it, but I think Windwalker uses it a lot more in Mythic Plus. Raids, it is quite strong, of course, but you do need to take Transcendence in order to unlock Ring of Peace, which is invaluable Mythic Plus utility. And this also opens up the ability to take both Dampen Harm and Diffuse, of course. So Dampen Harm is something you had access to before. Diffuse is new-ish. You had access to it a long time ago, but you did not have access to it in Shadowlands, of course. So this is a gain for Brewmasters going into the expansion. And now you have a further 2 points to spend. You have a few options here, and my suggestion is going down this left side to get some even more healing done. So an 8% increase of all healing, not just your own, but all healing taken, just flat 8%, and this will stack nicely with some other things you'll get. This opens up the capstone row, and there's basically a few things in the capstone row you really want, and the rest you can kind of ignore. So looking at this, this is just kind of gating 2 things you do want. It can be useful, especially in Mythic Plus, right? You're going to Touch of Death fairly frequently, and so having a 90-second CDR on Touch of Death is actually pretty nice DPS-wise. And then you definitely want Resonant Fist. Now, this is the talent that I told you about earlier at the beginning of this video, where it's definitely dealing way too much damage now, as it's just a passive ability where your attacks have a chance to deal nature damage in AoE. I'm guessing this gets tuned down or target capped or something of the sort, because it is dealing so much damage right now. But at least now, if that makes it, of course, worth the take. I expect it's always going to be worth the take, even assuming this gets nerfed when it gets nerfed. But just be aware of that fact. And this does unlock Summon White Tiger statue. So another new ability coming in Dragonflight, basically similar to the Jade Serpent and Black Ox statues. It's just a DPS statue. You just throw it down, it pulses damage, has a 2-minute cooldown, lasts for 30 seconds. Just kind of a throw it down and forget it button. You can also grab Bounce Back over here for some defensiveness. So when a hit deals more than 20% of your health, you reduce all damage taken by 20% for 4 seconds. It can happen once every 30 seconds. Pretty nice for Brewmasters who really want to maintain that kind of steady damage intake. You still have 4 points. You're not too interested in anything over here. There is this avoidance point over here, which could be quite good in Mythic Plus in certain situations, right? Because the big thing you want to keep in mind is this is a 10-yard range, and as a tank, you're often more than 10 yards away from at least half your party. But I can see in some dungeons where you're going to be stacked heavily, or you're safe to stack, or hits that are mitigated by avoidance, this could be a play later on, and especially in higher keys. For the most part, though, I expect you'll go down this left side fully and pick up Chi Wave, pick up another boost to Expel Harm's critical healing, and then pick up this which is another 8% increase healing taken from all sources. This is the same kind of 10-yard range, so it's not like it's going to have no value for everyone else, but of course it is always active on the Brewmaster, and kind of all these traits here, boosting expel harm and boosting your healing taken, are pretty powerful for Brewmaster to use just for themselves. But like I said, I could see a world where you kind of drop these 2 points in high keys and put it in the avoidance, just because it gives value to everyone else, especially if there's some very dangerous AoE hits that you're able to stack for and get everyone within that 10-yard radius. But that's a pretty niche scenario, so for the most part I expect it to be over here in close to heart. Some things to note about this build is you don't really have much roll. You have your single roll, you don't really grab your extra charge up here, and you don't really grab this one over here either. It takes a little getting used to having just a single charge of roll and then your Tigers list, of course, but mobility tends to be much less impactful, especially from a tank's perspective in Mythic Plus dungeons, so that's something you definitely are okay sacrificing in order to get significantly more healing throughput, as well as defensive ability, damage, and utility. Now, let's talk a bit about raiding. So, moving down, what kind of changes for raiding? So first off, you don't need several of this utility, right? Your kick, definitely do not need that. Also points like Ring of Peace, it definitely is something not needed, and even Transcendence to a degree, depending on the fight, may not be fully needed. So you can drop that as well, and you kind of have a few spots to put these points in. So first off, you right off the bat immediately now are like, hey, I can all of a sudden take roll. I can all of a sudden go down here and take Chi Torpedo or Celerity. Have two stacks of Chi Torpedo again. I have that mobility back, and in raiding, fight dependent, but a lot of fights now in general, mobility is more valuable for tanks in raids than Mythic Plus in a lot of fights. So this gives you the points to be able to pick up those mobility options while still having a lot of the damage and healing options, and that to open up the bottom of the tree. Again, you can grab close to heart because even more so than Mythic Plus, a lot of cases you are not stacked with your raid. So it can be pretty hard to get value out of the avoidance portion of Generous Pour, and then between the two as a tank, you'd much rather have the healing taken increase at all times than the 4% avoidance at all times. So that's why I'd recommend Brewmasters going that way. And then similarly, I don't really think you want to take Fatal Touch very much in raids. Again, that's very fight dependent, but it's pretty niche that you're going to Touch of Death very often. But what it does do is open up Bounce Back and then Resonant Fist, right? It opens up both of these things, so that's kind of why you take it. It just saves you points. Black Ox Statue is some pretty valuable utility on specific fights. Niche though, going back to something like Touch of Death, again, you can get another boost to Touch of Death, where it can be used on targets with less than 15% health remaining, dealing 35% of your maximum health in damage. So if there is a use for Touch of Death in a fight, you could invest it in Touch of Death. It can go right into Transcendence. If you don't really have anywhere else to do it, you can grab your kick, of course, if a specific boss fight needs you to pick up your kick. So you have a lot of flexibility with this last point over here, and you can do a lot of things with it. So that's pretty nice for Brewmasters. I'm going to dump this here, and let's say you take Transcendence. I think that's probably a good standard pick for Brewmasters, but you have that flexibility there. Now, let's look at the spec specific tree. So like pretty much every other spec, you're grabbing all this stuff at the top here. You're grabbing Hit Scheme. Dealing damage with Blackout Kick increases the damage of Cake Smash, stacking up to 4 times. You got Gift of the Ox here. When you take damage, you have a chance to summon a Healing Sphere visible to you. Extra Healing Spheres, right? And then you will like to pick one of these two, Rushing Jade Wind and Special Delivery. They're both pretty equivalent for the most part. However, Rushing Jade Wind has a higher number of hits, and that is relevant because anything that scales with number of hits, like Resonant Fists, will proc more often with Rushing Jade Wind comparatively to the two. So that's currently interaction, is Rushing Jade Wind is proccing this ability a lot. So I'm going to say Rushing Jade Wind, but should that change, outside of this interaction, these spells are relatively close. But we just skip out on Healing Elixir. I don't think this is a particularly strong spell. I don't actually recommend taking it, and you really don't need another button to press. Moving down, let's get some abilities over here. So we got Celestial Brew, of course, and we're going to get the advanced or improved Celestial Brew, increasing the absorption effect based on stagger Purified. We're also going to grab Breath of Fire, of course, core rotational ability. And here's where we can start getting interesting. So when we can get Salabim's Strength. Hope I said that right. When you use Keg Smash, the remaining cooldown on Breath of Fire is reset. Now this paired with Double Keg essentially allows you to maintain 100% Breath of Fire uptime, which is very, very good with another point we're going to take later on, Charred Passions. But we'll get into that in a second here. Continuing to move down, let's go here. We've got Improved Purifying Brew, 2 charges, of course, very nice to have. You've got a pretty nice choice note here between Black Ox Brew or Bob and Weave. Both are usable, of course. I'm going to just click Bob and Weave. We've got Invoke down the middle, of course, and then we can go down the right side. We still need to invest 5 points, so we're going to get a point in Zen Med. You can go over here, and here is that other talent that I talked about at the beginning of the video, where Purifying Brew will heal you for 25% of the Purified Stagger damage, so this gets a nice little boost from your 4 set. Moving down, you also can get Light Brewing to reduce the cooldown of your Purifying and Celestial Brews by 20%. That's pretty nice boost. And since we're talking Mythic Plus here, going down this right side, there is Shadowboxing Tread, so Blackout's kick damage increased by 20%, and it hits 2 additional targets. Beneath that is Face Bomb, so Tiger Palm has a 50% chance to deal 200% normal damage and reduce the cooldown of your brews by 1 additional second, because that is getting a pretty nice trait down here at the bottom. Counter Strike, each time you dodge or an enemy misses you, your next Tiger Palm or Spinning Crane Kick deals increased damage. Is a pretty powerful trait for Brewmaster, especially because you have so many targets hitting you, right? So you are able to proc this fairly consistently in a lot of the dungeon. Let's move back over to the other side for now. Charred Passions, like I talked about. So when you Breath of Fire, you ignite your leg for 8 seconds. So during those 8 seconds, your Blackout Kick and your Spinning Crane Kick deal 100% increased damage as fire, and then refresh your Breath of Fire. So basically, the whole thing here is you want to try and cast Breath of Fire at least once every 8 seconds to maintain this Charred Passion at as high an uptime as you can. And 100% is certainly reachable, especially with Double Keg, as well as the resets on Breath of Fire from your Keg Smash above. So that is something that you should aim for, especially with this build in particular, and it lets you do a lot of extra fire damage. From here, you have a few choices of how you want to access Bone Dust Brew, because you definitely do want to access Bone Dust Brew. And so it's either Walk with the Ox, so your abilities that grant Shuffle, reduce the cooldown of your Ox by 0.5 seconds, and increases his stomp damage by 20%. I actually lean more towards High Tolerance, so Stagger is 4% more effective, and you gain up to 10% haste based on your current level of Stagger. Honestly, Invoke doesn't feel too strong right now for Brewmasters on the beta. It's okay, but you kind of have to invest also like these points down here as well to increase his stomp damage further, and that's kind of just a point you don't really have to invest. So you don't really have, like, it'll take 4 points basically to get a really strong Ox. I'm not a fan of this. It's a similar problem like Guardian Druids face with Berserk slash Incarn, right? They have to invest equivalently like 4 points, sometimes 5 points to make it any good of a cooldown, and that doesn't feel great. It takes up way too many points. I'm not a big fan of this. And you have so many other options now as well that you don't really need to rely much on Ox for damage or mitigation, right? You have so many other options that you don't really need to make this a giga cooldown. So I avoid that and just kind of have a baseline Ox. This unlocks Necrolord Bone Dust Brew, not Necrolord Brew, and you still have 5 points available. So beside the Ox here, Elusive Footwork, Blackout Kick deals an additional 10% damage, and Blackout Kick critical hit grants an additional 2 stacks of Elusive Brawler. That's pretty solid. And now you can make your way down the middle of the tree here to Exploding Keg, as well as Storm Shout's Last Keg, so additional damage and an additional charge of Keg Smash. Now you have 1 single point left, and you have some more options. You could do the like full Necrolord-ish build where you can go here. You can grab Bountiful Brew here if you don't want to deal with Weapons of Order stuff, and this will be pretty decent as well, right? You'll get pretty decent uptime on Bone Dust Brew because you'll not only be getting procs of them, but you'll also be getting CDR on your own Bone Dust Brew. But the other option is to actually just play default Bone Dust Brew and put this point in Weapons of Order, and now you have Weapons of Order and Bone Dust Brew, and you can do some pretty insane shenanigans. I would definitely say, like, if you're already like worried about the number of buttons, you can drop this Weapons of Order for now, play Bountiful Brew, and then once you start getting more comfortable, kind of like, okay, now I'm going to test out how is it like while adding Weapons of Order into the mix. It is a lot. It is quite a bit. That is for sure. So not for the faint of heart. Like I was mentioning before, some variations. You can do a bigger investment in Aux. For example, you could do something like take those points, move it there, and you can move that exploding keg there, and you can do something like this to invest in Aux. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of that. I'd much rather do something like this. But you have those options available to you, and this is actually a pretty solid generalist for Brewmasters from both raids and Mythic Plus. They don't change too much within their tree between the two forms of content, but you can change a fair bit. Like if you go back to that Aux type build, right? If you do this, and then you still have an extra point, you can all of a sudden go and you can summon your Aux during Weapons of Order as well. Could be quite strong in a raid environment with less targets where you're not getting too much value from Bone Dust, but you definitely are going to want to play with this the Breath of Fire, Charred Passion stuff. It's quite strong. You also have access to make Zen Med like an actual CD over here, so it has 25% reduced cooldown and is no longer cancelled when you move or when you are hit by a melee attack, right? Otherwise, Zen Med is kind of a bit niche in its uses, but this makes it significantly less niche if you do need another CD. Again, Brewmasters tend to have a lot of CDs, but if you specifically need, especially a big DR for some things, can be pretty valuable there. But that is it for Brewmaster, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and this series. Again, check out those other tank videos down in the description below and let me know how you guys are feeling about all the different tank specs going into Dragonflight down in the comments below. If you have any questions at all regarding any tank spec, you can stop by my Twitch channel as well at Tactics. Ask me there. I do a lot of beta content as well as high Mythic Plus keys and Mythic rating from a tank POV, and I would be happy to answer any questions you guys have. In terms of future content plans, I'll be doing a comparison video of all the tanks and how they kind of stack up between each other currently on the beta, and also be doing things like talking through dungeons relatively in depth on things like new kicks, stoppable abilities, things like that to help you get up to speed with those dungeons when they're new to you in the expansion. I'll of course be doing much more tank content as well, so make sure you guys do subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single video. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.